I sat in the sterile hospital room clutching my diagnosis papers when my husband backed toward the door, saying quietly, "I didn't sign up for this," his wedding ring already removed from his finger. 10 years of marriage dissolving faster than the tears rolling down my face. Dr. Rivera's voice seemed to come from somewhere distant. The words, "Stage 2B breast cancer," hanging in the air between us like a physical presence. The pristine office with its medical degrees and reassuring pamphlets about survival rates blurred at the edges of my vision as I instinctively reached for Mark's hand. He pulled away. I turned to look at my husband of 8 years, momentarily confused by the physical withdrawal. What I saw in his expression wasn't shock or grief or fear, emotions I might have expected. Instead, his face had settled into something cold and calculating, his eyes focused on the middle distance, rather than on me or the doctor. "What are the treatment options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, turning back to Dr. Rivera. She outlined a comprehensive plan: surgery within 2 weeks, followed by chemotherapy, then radiation if necessary, statistical outcomes, timeline projections, medical leave requirements, each sentence another brick in the wall of my new reality. Throughout the explanation, Mark remained silent, his body angled slightly away from mine, one foot tapping rhythmically against the floor as if counting down seconds until he could leave. "This is a lot to process," Dr. Rivera acknowledged, sliding a folder across her desk. "I've included everything we've discussed, plus resources for support groups, nutritional guidance, and financial assistance programs. Do either of you have any questions?" "How will this affect our lives long term?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice flat. "Work commitments, travel plans, financial obligations." "Not our health, not our future together, not my survival." Dr. Rivera's eyes flickered between us briefly, before she answered with professional detachment, explaining the potential timeline for recovery and return to normal activities. Mark nodded, absorbing the information without emotional response, already making calculations I couldn't yet comprehend. The drive home passed in silence, Mark's knuckles white against the steering wheel, my hands clutching the folder of information like a life raft. Neither of us spoke until we were inside our house, the renovated Craftsman we'd purchased 3 years ago, with the garden I'd planted myself and the kitchen we'd remodeled last spring. "I need to say something," Mark announced, standing rigidly in our living room without removing his jacket. "And I need you to just listen." I sank onto the sofa, the folder still clutched against my chest, suddenly aware that whatever came next would be worse than the diagnosis. "I can't do this," he stated flatly. "The cancer, the treatments, the caregiving, the uncertainty, I didn't sign up for this." The words hit with physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. 8 years of marriage reduced to a contract he was unilaterally terminating due to unexpected terms. "What exactly do you think you didn't sign up for?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The in-sickness and health part of our vows?" "Don't make this about semantics, Claire." His tone sharpened with irritation. "I'm being honest with you. I can't put my life on hold for a year or more while you go through treatments that might not even work." "Put your life on hold," I repeated, the enormity of his selfishness beginning to penetrate the shock. "I have cancer, Mark. This isn't a hobby I've taken up that inconveniences you." He began pacing, a familiar sign of his building impatience. "I know how this sounds, but I've always been honest about what I want in life. My career is at a critical point. The Singapore expansion needs my direct oversight. I can't be tied here indefinitely as a caregiver." My mind flashed back to countless conversations throughout our marriage. His frequent comments about never wanting to be trapped or limited by circumstances. His careful questioning whenever friends dealt with health challenges. His discomfort during my father's heart surgery 2 years ago. The signs had always been there, but I'd interpreted them as normal anxiety rather than fundamental character flaws. "So you're what, divorcing me because I got cancer?" The words felt surreal, leaving my mouth. "I think a separation makes sense for now," he replied, his tone suddenly businesslike. "I've already spoken with the Singapore office. They can accelerate my relocation timeline. I'll be financially responsible, of course." Already spoken with them, the words registered with startling clarity. This wasn't an impulsive reaction to shocking news. He'd been planning this, preparing for it. How long have you been arranging this? I asked, a strange calm settling over me as shock receded and clarity emerged. Mark hesitated, his practiced explanation momentarily derailed by the direct question. The Singapore position has been in discussion for months. You know that. That's not what I asked. How long have you been planning to leave me? He checked his watch while discussing the dissolution of our marriage, and sighed. I have calls to make. We can discuss logistics tomorrow when we're both thinking more clearly. Without waiting for a response, he headed upstairs. Within minutes, I heard drawers opening, closet doors sliding, the distinctive sound of luggage being filled. Not gathering essentials for a night away to process difficult news, packing systematically for departure. I remained on the sofa, the doctor's folders still clutched against my chest, my mind working with unexpected clarity, the pieces assembling themselves into a picture I hadn't allowed myself to see. Mark's increasing distance over recent months, the late nights at the office, the business trips that extended without explanation, the vague references to Singapore that I'd assumed were routine project discussions. He'd been preparing his exit strategy for months, waiting for the right opportunity. My diagnosis hadn't caused his departure. It had merely provided convenient timing. When he came downstairs 45 minutes later, 2 suitcases stood by the door. Not hastily packed bags for a temporary separation, but carefully selected essential belongings. I'll have the rest shipped once I'm settled, he explained, setting his house key on the entryway table. I'll transfer money to cover immediate expenses until we formalize arrangements. I looked at this man I'd shared 8 years with, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time, the practiced speech, the careful financial reference to preempt accusations of abandonment, the strategic exit plan to minimize his discomfort. Who is she? I asked quietly. His momentary freeze confirmed my suspicion before he recovered. This isn't about someone else. This is about what I can and cannot handle in my life right now. You always were a skilled liar, I observed, surprising myself with the calm detachment in my voice. But your tells haven't changed since we met. Do I know her? Mark's jaw tightened, frustration that his carefully constructed narrative was being challenged when he'd planned for guilt and tears instead. Sarah from the Singapore advance team. It's recent and not the point. This would have happened regardless. Sarah, the woman he'd mentioned with increasing frequency over the past 6 months. The brilliant strategist he'd brought up at dinner parties. The colleague whose insights he'd quoted with growing admiration. Get out, I said simply, the last piece falling into place. He hesitated, visibly recalculating. This wasn't following the script he'd prepared. The emotional breakdown, the pleading, the messy scene that would reinforce his decision to leave. My calm clarity had disrupted his narrative. We should discuss practical. No, I interrupted. There's nothing to discuss tonight. You've made your position perfectly clear, and I need to plan my cancer treatment without the additional burden of managing your guilt. Take your bags and get out. For a moment, he seemed almost relieved. The clean break he'd hoped for, but hadn't expected. He gathered his luggage, pausing at the door with what appeared to be a moment of genuine regret. I'll have my lawyer contact you. For what it's worth, I am sorry about the diagnosis. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. In the sudden silence of our home, my home now, I finally opened the folder, Doctor. Rivera had given me, spreading the contents across the coffee table. Surgery in 2 weeks, 6 rounds of chemotherapy, possible radiation, medical leave forms, insurance information, support group schedules. I had approximately 10 minutes of absolute stillness, staring at these papers that mapped my immediate future, before my practical nature asserted itself through the emotional numbness. I needed a strategy, not just for cancer treatment, but for everything Mark's departure had instantly complicated. I reached for my phone and called the one person whose analytical mind matched my own. Rachel? It's Claire. I need your help with something complicated. I paused, organizing my thoughts into their clearest form. I've been diagnosed with breast cancer, and Mark just left me. Her sharp intake of breath was followed not by emotional platitudes, but the response I needed most. Give me 30 minutes to arrange childcare. I'll bring my laptop and stay the night. We're going to make a plan. As I ended the call, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. The initial shock was receding, replaced by something cooler and more focused. Mark had calculated his exit to maximize his advantage, assuming my diagnosis would leave me too emotionally and physically vulnerable to respond effectively. He had severely underestimated what I was capable of, even in crisis. A strange calm settled over me as I gathered the medical documents into a neat stack. I had cancer, and my husband had abandoned me at the moment of diagnosis. These were facts, not subject to negotiation or denial. The path forward would require strategic thinking, careful resource management, and emotional discipline. Mark thought he had orchestrated the perfect exit. He had no idea what he had actually set in motion. Rachel arrived with military precision 30 minutes after our call, laptop bag slung over one shoulder, overnight case in hand, and a focused expression that had intimidated opposing counsel throughout her legal career. No tears, no emotional breakdown, just practical presence when I needed it most. "We're approaching this systematically," she announced, setting up her computer on the dining room table. "Medical needs first, then financial security, then legal position. Everything documented." Her methodical approach anchored me, providing structure when the ground beneath my life had completely shifted. We spent the first hour organizing my medical information, insurance details, treatment timeline, disability benefits, FMLA requirements, each document carefully reviewed, each deadline and requirement noted. "Mark is still legally your husband, which means his insurance likely remains your primary coverage," Rachel observed, scanning my policy details. "We need to secure that immediately before he attempts modifications." She was right. Despite his promise of financial responsibility, I'd seen the calculating look in his eyes. Promises made during exit wouldn't necessarily translate to actions once he'd established physical and emotional distance. The medical documentation completed, Rachel turned to the financial assessment with the same unwavering focus. "We need to understand your complete financial picture immediately. Joint accounts, individual accounts, retirement funds, property ownership, everything." I pulled up our financial information on my laptop, the organization reflecting my natural precision, joint checking and savings, separate retirement accounts, investment portfolio with mixed contribution history, mortgage details showing both names but primarily my down payment from an inheritance. As I systematically reviewed each account, a discrepancy emerged that I'd overlooked in recent months: regular transfers from our joint account to an unfamiliar destination. "What's this account number?" Rachel asked, highlighting the transfer pattern. "I don't recognize it," I admitted, a cold certainty settling in my stomach. "It's not any of our established accounts." Within minutes, Rachel had traced the account to a recently established individual account in Mark's name, opened approximately 4 months earlier at a different bank than our primary financial institution. The transfer amounts had started small but increased steadily, totaling nearly $45,000. "He's been moving money systematically," Rachel observed, her expression hardening, establishing separate resources while maintaining the appearance of joint finances. The timing aligned perfectly with the first mentions of Sarah from the Singapore team. Mark's exit strategy had been in development far longer than I'd realized, each element carefully orchestrated to maximize his position when the final break occurred. "We need to protect your assets immediately," Rachel advised, "not emptying accounts, which could appear retaliatory, but securing your proportional contributions and preventing further unauthorized transfers." While Rachel made notes on immediate financial protections, I found myself drawn to Mark's home office, a space I'd respected as his domain throughout our marriage. The room felt different now, its organized minimalism no longer appearing as shared aesthetic, but strategic accessibility for rapid departure. The locked drawer in his desk yielded easily to the spare key I'd always known was taped beneath the bottom drawer, a hiding place he thought clever but had mentioned during our first year of marriage. Inside, I found what I was looking for: a leather portfolio containing documents he'd been unwilling to store in our shared filing system. Lease agreement for an apartment in Singapore, dated 6 weeks earlier. Employment contract with significantly higher compensation than he'd disclosed. International banking information for accounts I'd never known existed. Emails printed and highlighted, showing correspondence with divorce attorneys dating back 3 months. Most revealing was his medical insurance documentation, with notes about coverage limitations for spouses' pre-existing conditions and the timing requirements for dependent coverage termination. He had researched how quickly he could remove me from his insurance after a separation. I photographed each document methodically, creating digital evidence before returning everything exactly as I'd found it. Not acting from emotional impulse, but strategic necessity. Documentation that would prove critical in the proceedings I now saw were inevitable. "Claire," Rachel called from the dining room, "there's something you should see." She had discovered additional evidence while examining our joint account transaction history. Restaurant charges in neighborhoods far from Mark's office, hotel bookings on weekends he'd claimed to be working, jewelry store purchase that I'd never received. The timeline matched perfectly with the Singapore project initiation approximately 7 months earlier. Sarah didn't just happen, I observed, connecting the revelations with his behavior changes over the past months. She was part of the plan from the beginning. Rachel nodded grimly. "This isn't opportunistic abandonment. It's premeditated extraction with your diagnosis providing convenient timing." The evidence continued mounting as we expanded our investigation. Mark's supposedly urgent business trips, coinciding perfectly with Sarah's project schedule. Calendar entries hidden in shared cloud storage showing dinner reservations and weekend plans. Airline booking confirmations showing adjoining seats for international travel. His digital trail revealed careful planning, but surprisingly poor concealment. The confidence of someone who never expected scrutiny, who assumed his spouse would accept surface explanations without investigation. He didn't think I'd check, I realized, scrolling through the evidence of months of deception. He thought I trusted him completely. "Men like Mark count on that," Rachel observed, her own divorce lending weight to her assessment. "They rely on established patterns of trust to cover systematic betrayal." By midnight, we had compiled comprehensive documentation across multiple dimensions. Financial transfers establishing separate resources, communication records showing premeditated departure, expense trails confirming the relationship with Sarah, and medical coverage research demonstrating awareness of how my healthcare might be impacted. "What's your next step?" Rachel asked as we organized the evidence into a secure digital folder. I considered the question carefully, acknowledging both the cancer treatment demands and the legal challenges now facing me simultaneously. "Secure my position completely before he realizes I'm doing anything beyond processing the diagnosis." She nodded approvingly. "While he's congratulating himself on a clean break, you'll be building an unassailable case." "Exactly. He expects emotional collapse, followed by desperate negotiation. He's not preparing for strategic response." The following morning brought the first predictable move in Mark's planned sequence. A carefully worded email expressing appropriate regret about the unfortunate timing, while outlining his proposed separation terms. The calculated generosity designed to appear reasonable while protecting his primary assets and limiting ongoing obligations. "Claire, I've had time to think about our conversation yesterday, and while I stand by my decision that separation is necessary, I regret the abruptness of my departure. The timing with your diagnosis is unfortunate, and I want to ensure you have appropriate support during this difficult period. I propose the following arrangement while we work through formal separation. Continued insurance coverage through my employer plan, monthly support payment of $3,000 for the next 6 months. Exclusive use of the house until we determine next steps regarding the property, division of investment accounts, according to direct contribution evidence. My attorney will contact you next week with formal documentation, but I wanted to provide this overview directly. I hope we can handle this transition with minimal conflict despite the circumstances. Mark." The email confirmed everything we'd uncovered: his calculated approach, the pre-planned legal involvement, the financial terms already developed before the separation itself. The generous appearing terms actually representing significant reduction from my legal entitlements, particularly given the abandonment circumstances. I forwarded the email to Rachel without response to Mark. His expectation of immediate grateful acceptance would be the first expectation to go unmet. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the morning. Messages from friends who'd apparently received Mark's carefully crafted narrative, each text revealing another aspect of his strategic communication campaign. "Claire? Mark just told us about your diagnosis and the separation. Is there anything you need? Jennifer, so shocked to hear everything you're going through. Mark said you wanted space, but we're here when you're ready. David and Sandra, Mark mentioned you two decided to separate before the diagnosis, but are supporting each other through it. Please call if you need anything. Michael, the calculated narrative manipulation, positioning the separation as mutual, implying it preceded the diagnosis, suggesting ongoing support rather than abandonment. Each message carefully seeded to establish his preferred version of events within our social circle. I responded selectively, with factual precision rather than emotional appeals. Thank you for reaching out. To clarify, Mark informed me he was leaving immediately after my cancer diagnosis yesterday, stating he didn't sign up for this. I appreciate your support during treatment, which begins next week. Claire? The counter-narrative established through simple truth rather than matched manipulation. By afternoon, I had implemented the first phase of financial security measures. My proportional contribution to our joint savings, approximately 65% based on clear deposit records, transferred to a new individual account at a different bank. Investment accounts secured against unauthorized access. Credit monitoring established to track any new account activity. Not emptying shared resources, which could appear vindictive, but methodically securing my documented contributions while maintaining comprehensive records of all transactions. Strategic protection rather than emotional retaliation. The most important call came mid-afternoon. Direct contact with the insurance company to verify my coverage status and establish communication protocols requiring my explicit authorization for any policy changes. The representative's tone shifted noticeably when I explained the circumstances. I've added a security flag to your file, Mrs. Mitchell, she assured me. Any attempt to modify dependent coverage will require direct verification with you, including coverage termination or status changes. And if my husband attempts changes without my knowledge? I asked, anticipating Mark's likely approach once he realized I wasn't accepting his terms without question. We'll contact you immediately at the secure number you've provided, and no changes will be processed without your explicit consent. Her professional tone softened slightly. We see these situations more often than anyone would like. Your coverage is protected. By evening, I had secured my immediate medical and financial position, documented Mark's abandonment circumstances comprehensively, and established counter-narrative presence within our social circle. Not through emotional appeals, but factual clarity, each response presenting verifiable truth against his carefully constructed fiction. The hospital pre-registration for surgery provided unexpected strategic advantage, forms requiring emergency contact information and healthcare proxy designation. Mark's name systematically removed from all documentation, replaced with Rachel's information with her informed consent. He's lost the right to make medical decisions if I'm incapacitated, I explained as we completed the paperwork. That privilege belongs to someone who's actually committed to my well-being. The digital evidence compilation continued growing as Mark's attempted narrative control expanded across communication channels. Each message, each carefully worded explanation to mutual friends, each financial transaction following his departure, all documented and organized chronologically, building a comprehensive case that would prove unassailable when formal proceedings began. 3 days after his departure, the pattern shifted as expected. His unanswered messages growing increasingly frustrated, the calculated reasonableness giving way to irritation that his terms hadn't been gratefully accepted without question. The financial monitoring alerts confirming attempted access to secured accounts, exactly as predicted. The final confirmation of his character came through his mother's unexpected visit, Eleanor arriving with casseroles and concern, her presence revealing the narrative Mark had provided to his own family. Mark told us about your separation decision and then the awful diagnosis, she explained. Arranging food in my refrigerator. He's devastated by the timing, but said you both agreed this was coming for months. I studied this woman who had always treated me with genuine affection, recognizing an opportunity for truth without manipulation. Eleanor, I need to share something difficult, I began, maintaining composed precision rather than emotional appeal. Mark left immediately after my diagnosis, specifically stating he didn't sign up for this regarding cancer treatment. There was no mutual decision or prior discussion of separation. Her hands stilled, disbelief giving way to dawning comprehension as I continued. He had already arranged the Singapore transfer, secured an apartment there, and begun relationship with a colleague named Sarah. The separation was his unilateral decision, implemented deliberately when I was most vulnerable. Eleanor's expression shifted through shock to something harder as the truth registered. Her subsequent phone call to Mark from my kitchen, specifically requesting speaker mode so I could hear, provided unexpected alliance from a quarter he had assumed would automatically support his narrative. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble when he answered. "Did you leave Claire the day she was diagnosed with cancer?" His momentary silence confirmed everything before he attempted recovery. "Mom, it's more complicated than—" "Answer the question, Mark. Did you tell your wife you didn't sign up for this and leave the same day she was diagnosed with cancer?" Another pause, then, "The timing was unfortunate, but—" "I have never been so ashamed," Eleanor interrupted, her voice shaking. "Your father and I raised you better than this." The call ended with her unequivocal statement of position. She would be supporting me through treatment regardless of Mark's choices. His attempted damage control callback went unanswered as Eleanor and I sat in my kitchen, the truth between us creating unexpected alliance. "What do you need?" she asked simply, the practical question cutting through potential emotional complications. "Right now, documentation and preparation," I explained honestly. "I'm securing my position before beginning treatment." She nodded, understanding the strategic necessity. "Then that's what we'll help with, and Mark can explain himself to the family without our assistance." As she left, promising to return before my surgery the following week, I added this unexpected development to the comprehensive case file we were building. Not just evidence of Mark's deception and abandonment, but documentation of natural consequences emerging from truth exposure, rather than manipulated narrative. That night, reviewing the extensive evidence trail we had compiled, Rachel observed what had been developing beneath my conscious awareness since the diagnosis and desertion. "You're handling this with remarkable strategic clarity," she noted. "Most people would be emotionally paralyzed by either the diagnosis or the abandonment, let alone both simultaneously." I considered her observation, recognizing the truth it contained. The overwhelming crisis had somehow triggered hyper-focused response rather than emotional collapse. Each challenge met with strategic precision rather than reactive chaos. Mark's fundamental miscalculation, I realized. He expected physical vulnerability to ensure emotional vulnerability. He didn't consider that crisis might actually clarify priorities and eliminate distractions. The evidence trail we had established in just 3 days would normally take weeks to compile. Financial documentation, communication records, witness statements, detailed timelines. The focused intensity catalyzed by simultaneous crises had accelerated strategic implementation beyond normal parameters. Mark had orchestrated what he believed was perfect extraction timing, assuming diagnosis would render me incapable of effective response during critical initial phases. Instead, he had activated capabilities he'd never recognized existed beneath the accommodating partnership facade I'd maintained throughout our marriage. His greatest strategic error was about to become apparent. Catherine Westfield's office projected exactly the atmosphere I needed in legal representation: competent efficiency rather than performative sympathy. Her reputation for handling complex divorce cases involving medical crises had made her my immediate choice. Her impressive track record with abandonment claims particularly relevant to my situation. She reviewed the evidence portfolio we'd compiled with measured assessment, occasionally making notes, but primarily absorbing the comprehensive documentation with professional detachment. "This is remarkably thorough," she observed, after nearly an hour of silent review. "Most clients in your situation provide emotional accounts requiring extensive verification. You've delivered forensic-level documentation." "Strategic necessity," I explained simply. "My focus needs to remain on medical treatment rather than evidence compilation." Catherine nodded, understanding the dual challenges I was facing. "Based on what you've provided, we have multiple strong positions: the abandonment during medical crisis, the documented premeditation, the financial diversion prior to separation, the attempted insurance manipulation." "What's our optimal approach?" I asked, medical folder resting beside the legal documentation on her desk. The dual battles I was now fighting simultaneously. Immediate legal protection followed by strategic patience, she replied, outlining a comprehensive approach matching my own instincts. We'll file for legal separation immediately with emergency spousal support provisions, citing the medical crisis circumstances. The strategy she detailed aligned perfectly with my priorities: immediate financial and medical security, while preserving strategic flexibility as treatment progressed, and Mark's response patterns emerged more clearly. The temporary orders will include continued medical coverage, significant spousal support reflecting the abandonment circumstances, exclusive use of the marital home, and protective provisions regarding joint assets, Catherine explained, drafting notes as she spoke. What about the Singapore relocation, I asked, considering the international complications. Actually provides additional leverage, she noted, with professional satisfaction. Abandonment across international boundaries during medical crisis substantially strengthens our position, particularly regarding support requirements and asset division. We spent the next 2 hours developing comprehensive strategy: immediate filing for maximum protection, communication protocols to minimize my direct involvement during treatment, documentation requirements to strengthen our position as proceedings advanced. Most importantly, Catherine emphasized as our meeting concluded, document everything while focusing on your medical care. Let us handle the legal battle while you concentrate on treatment. The perfect strategic balance, legal protection proceeding independently, while I directed primary energy toward the more immediate physical battle. From Catherine's office, I proceeded directly to my next critical appointment: financial consultation with Melissa Rodriguez, the specialist Rachel had recommended for complex divorce financial planning during medical crisis. Melissa's approach matched Catherine's professional efficiency: detailed analysis rather than emotional engagement, strategic planning rather than sympathetic platitudes. Her review of our financial documentation revealed additional opportunities I hadn't fully recognized. Your contributions to marital assets significantly exceed your husband's over the past 3 years, she observed, spreadsheets displaying the clear differential. Combined with abandonment circumstances and disability implications, this strengthens your position regarding property division substantially. We developed comprehensive financial strategy, immediate protection mechanisms, treatment cost projections, disability income planning, long-term security requirements. Each element carefully calibrated to address both immediate crisis needs and extended recovery considerations. Most clients facing simultaneous medical and divorce crises struggle with fundamental security planning, Melissa noted as we finalized immediate implementation steps. Your strategic approach provides substantial advantage for both immediate stability and long-term recovery. The afternoon brought my next critical preparation phase: meeting with Dr. Rivera and her treatment team to establish clear medical protocols and communication boundaries. The comprehensive approach I'd developed with Rachel's assistance proved immediately valuable. You've thought of everything, Doctor, Rivera observed, reviewing my organized treatment folder with visible approval. Most patients in your circumstance are overwhelmed by the emotional and logistical complexities. Necessity focusing attention, I explained simply. Systematic approach reducing cognitive burden. We established clear parameters: treatment schedule optimization, communication protocols during potentially diminished capacity periods, advanced healthcare directives with Rachel designated as medical proxy, comprehensive documentation requirements for both medical and legal purposes. The team needs to understand something important, I explained to Dr. Rivera directly. My husband abandoned me immediately upon diagnosis, stating he didn't sign up for this. Any attempt by him to access my medical information or influence treatment decisions should be immediately reported and denied. Her expression reflected professional restraint over personal reaction, the experienced physician's balance between emotional response and clinical objectivity. We'll ensure complete protection of your medical information and decision autonomy, she assured me, adding specific security protocols to my file. Unfortunately, your situation isn't unique in our experience. We have established procedures for precisely these circumstances. The treatment coordinator provided additional strategic support, documentation of abandonment timing specifically for legal proceedings, coordination with insurance representatives regarding coverage protection, connection with hospital social services for additional resource access during treatment. We're not just treating your cancer, she explained with quiet intensity. We're supporting your complete well-being through multiple simultaneous challenges. The comprehensive support system establishing security parameters I hadn't anticipated. Medical professionals providing not merely treatment, but strategic alliance during vulnerability periods. By evening, I had implemented critical foundation elements across all essential dimensions. Legal protection initiated, financial security established, medical support system activated, documentation protocols implemented, the strategic framework necessary for navigating dual crises simultaneously. Rachel arrived with dinner and practical support, her continuing presence representing the personal alliance network, developing alongside professional resources. Catherine called me, she explained, arranging files we'd been organizing. She's impressed with your strategic preparation, said you've accomplished in days what normally takes weeks. Crisis clarifying priorities, I observed. Reviewing tomorrow's pre-surgery requirements. No energy available for anything except essential action. Mark called me today, Rachel mentioned, her tone carefully neutral. Tried to position himself as the concerned husband making difficult choices. Asked me to help you understand his perspective. I nodded, unsurprised by the predictable narrative management attempt. His expected strategic approach, using established relationships to rehabilitate public perception. I recorded the call, she added, professional instincts perfectly aligned with our documentation protocols. Added it to the evidence compilation. His specific statements about the separation timing relative to diagnosis will be particularly useful in proceedings. The systematic evidence compilation continuing through multiple channels simultaneously, Mark's own attempts at narrative management providing additional documentation of abandonment circumstances and premeditation evidence. Later that evening, Eleanor called with unexpected strategic reinforcement. Mark's sister Amanda wanted to provide formal statement regarding conversations before my diagnosis. He told Amanda about the Singapore plans 2 months ago, Eleanor explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. Specifically mentioned Sarah and the relationship development, said he was waiting for the right time to leave. Another critical evidence source emerging from quarters Mark had assumed would maintain family loyalty, regardless of circumstances. His fundamental miscalculation about relationship values, creating expanding consequence circles beyond his narrative control capabilities. Have Amanda contact Catherine Westfield directly, I suggested, maintaining systematic approach despite the emotional implications of family members choosing truth over loyalty. Her statement will be properly documented for maximum effectiveness. The night before surgery brought Mark's first direct contact attempt since his initial email. Phone call rather than written communication, likely attempting to avoid additional documentation while establishing concerned husband narrative. I didn't answer but allowed voicemail to capture his carefully constructed message. Claire, I'm checking in before your surgery tomorrow. Despite our situation, I want you to know I'm thinking about you and hoping for successful treatment. I've tried to be fair and supportive through this difficult time for both of us. Please have someone update me after the procedure. The calculated performance of appropriate concern without actual presence or support. The narrative construction designed for potential third-party audiences rather than genuine communication. The continued absence of acknowledgement regarding abandonment, timing, or circumstances. I forwarded the recording to Catherine without response to Mark, another documentation element in our comprehensive case development. The final pre-surgery evening required completion of practical preparation, advanced medical directives finalized, temporary legal authorities established, household management arrangements confirmed during initial recovery period. Each element systematically addressed despite physical discomfort and treatment anxiety. Eleanor arrived with practical support rather than emotional comfort. Overnight bag packed with efficient precision, household management plan organized with military detail, communication protocols established with treatment team. I raised a coward, she stated simply as we reviewed final preparations. But I'm not abandoning you because he did. Her matter-of-fact support perfectly matching my needs. Practical assistance without emotional complications. Strategic alliance without divided loyalty. The unexpected support network expanding beyond original parameters, through authentic value alignment, rather than obligatory connection. Morning brought surgery preparation and final strategic implementation. Legal paperwork filed precisely as treatment began. Temporary orders protecting financial and medical security during vulnerability period. Communication boundaries established across all channels. The surgical preparation nurse reviewed final documentation, adding specific notes about authorized contacts and information restrictions. No information to be provided to husband, she confirmed, updating digital records with security protocols. Authorized updates, only to designated contacts in priority order. The hospitals experienced handling of similar situations, reflecting the unfortunate frequency of abandonment during medical crisis. Institutional protections, developed through repeated witness of human behavior at its worst. As pre-surgical medications began taking effect, I completed mental inventory of strategic implementation status. Legal protection initiated, financial security established, medical support activated, documentation protocols implemented, support network coordinated. Each essential element systematically addressed despite dual crisis management requirements. The foundation established for navigating both battles simultaneously, cancer treatment and abandonment aftermath. Mark had calculated his departure timing to maximize advantage during my most vulnerable period, assuming physical limitation would prevent effective response to his strategic extraction. The fundamental miscalculation that would ultimately determine proceedings' outcome. The anesthesiologist began final preparations, monitors displaying vital signs within optimal parameters despite circumstances. "You're remarkably calm," she observed professionally. "Excellent presurgical indicators." "Strategic necessity," I replied simply as consciousness began receding. Both battles require optimal response capacity. The last thought before anesthesia took full effect reflected the unexpected clarity emerging from simultaneous crises. The strategic capacity activated by extreme necessity. The focused implementation catalyzed by dual challenges. Mark had orchestrated what he believed was perfect extraction timing. Instead, he had initiated the most comprehensive response I had ever deployed. His strategic error was about to become apparent across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The hospital room came into focus gradually, post-surgical disorientation giving way to methodical assessment. Eleanor sat beside the bed, her attentiveness providing immediate confirmation that authorized contacts protocols had been properly implemented. "Surgery successful," she reported efficiently, recognizing my preference for information over comfort. "Clean margins achieved. Lymph node examination showing limited spread. Dr. Rivera will provide complete details during rounds." I nodded, gathering strength before asking the question whose answer I already anticipated. "Mark?" "Attempted contact 3 times, Eleanor confirmed, her expression tightening. "Hospital security protocols functioning perfectly. No information provided. No access permitted. The strategic barriers we'd established performing exactly as designed. Protection during maximum vulnerability period, without requiring active management during recovery." My phone rested on the bedside table, notifications indicating multiple messages requiring no immediate response. Medical needs taking priority over communication management during initial recovery phase. Dr. Rivera arrived an hour later, surgical results folder in hand. Her professional demeanor carried subtle satisfaction, suggesting positive outcomes beyond standard expectations. "Remarkably successful procedure," she confirmed, displaying imaging results with precise explanation. "Tumor removal complete with excellent margins. Only 2 lymph nodes showing microscopic involvement. Staging remains at 2B with favorable treatment response indicators." The medical victory providing essential foundation for broader strategic implementation. Physical recovery trajectory, establishing parameters for parallel legal proceedings advancement. "Recovery protocols implemented immediately," she continued, outlining medication schedules and movement restrictions. "Chemotherapy evaluation in 3 weeks pending healing progression." I absorbed the information with focused attention, each element representing both medical necessity and strategic planning component. Recovery timelines determining implementation scheduling across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Rachel arrived that afternoon. Laptop and legal folders accompanying flowers. the practical support more valuable than symbolic gestures. Catherine asked me to provide updates, she explained, arranging documents where I could review them comfortably. The temporary orders were granted yesterday, full protection implemented across all requested dimensions. The legal documentation confirmed comprehensive security establishment, continued insurance coverage ordered regardless of Mark's employment status, substantial temporary support reflecting abandonment circumstances, exclusive home use rights secured, joint assets frozen pending final resolution. Most significantly, the abandonment circumstance documentation had apparently impacted the judge substantially. Handwritten notes on the order emphasizing extraordinary circumstances of medical crisis abandonment as justification for expedited proceedings and enhanced protection provisions. Mark's attorney contacted Catherine immediately following filing, Rachel continued, her expression suggesting unexpected developments. Apparently, your husband failed to disclose certain critical details when securing representation. The predictable strategic error, Mark's narrative management extending to his own legal counsel, the factual omissions now complicating his position as documented reality, emerged through formal proceedings. They've requested immediate settlement discussion, Rachel concluded, satisfaction briefly visible beneath professional demeanor. Catherine advised declining until after initial recovery, maintaining strategic timing advantage. Perfect alignment with my preferred approach, allowing Mark's recognition of disadvantageous position to develop fully before engaging negotiation from maximum strength positioning. The first direct hospital contact attempt came that evening. Mark's carefully scripted message delivered through hospital switchboard, rather than direct access channels. This is Mark Mitchell calling for Claire Mitchell. I've been trying to get updates about my wife's condition following surgery, but have been told there are restrictions. Please have someone call me immediately with her status. The calculated language revealing continued narrative construction. My wife, emphasizing legal relationship he had unilaterally abandoned. Restrictions, implying improper access limitation rather than authorized protocols. The message preserved for evidence documentation rather than meriting response during recovery focus. By the following morning, strategic implementation continued advancing across multiple fronts simultaneously. Medical recovery proceeding optimally, legal protection fully established, financial security confirmed through formal notification, documentation compilation expanding through Mark's own communication attempts. The first substantial power shift became evident through notification from Catherine. Mark's international relocation plans suspended indefinitely by his employer following formal abandonment documentation submission to their Human Resources Department. Apparently, abandoning one's spouse during cancer diagnosis creates liability concerns for multinational corporations, Catherine noted during her brief hospital visit. The Singapore position has been reassigned pending review of personal circumstances. The professional consequences emerging independently through corporate policy application rather than direct intervention, systemic responses to documented behavior generating impact beyond legal proceedings scope. 3 days post-surgery, discharge planning initiated with comprehensive support structure implementation. Eleanor's continued presence providing practical assistance. Rachel's regular involvement ensuring documentation maintenance. Catherine's strategic communication management, minimizing direct engagement requirements during initial recovery. Most significantly, an unexpected support dimension emerged through professional network activation. Colleagues organizing meal delivery schedules, household maintenance coverage, transportation arrangements for medical appointments. The practical support system developing organically through authentic relationship channels rather than obligation parameters. The hospital discharge coincided with notification of Mark's first significant strategic concession. Voluntary increase in temporary support payment above court-ordered amount. Transparent attempt at narrative rehabilitation through financial gesture. He's recognizing the severity of his position, Catherine observed when forwarding the notification. Allow the financial benefit while maintaining strategic distance. His concessions will increase as consequences continue expanding. Home recovery established new strategic implementation phase. Physical healing protocols balanced with legal proceedings advancement, each dimension supporting rather than competing with essential requirements. The systematic approach I'd implemented before surgery continued yielding advantages during recovery. comprehensive preparation eliminating decision burden during limited energy periods, strategic delegation enabling focused healing, while protection measures advanced independently. Mark's calculated departure, timed for maximum advantage during vulnerability, had instead catalyzed comprehensive system activation across multiple support dimensions. The strategic error becoming increasingly apparent as consequences continued expanding beyond his narrative management capabilities. What he had intended as perfect extraction timing had instead initiated my most significant empowerment activation. His fundamental miscalculation was becoming increasingly expensive across every relevant dimension. 2 weeks into recovery, the social consequences of Mark's abandonment expanded beyond his narrative control capabilities. What began as carefully managed messaging among mutual friends evolved into widespread reputation reassessment as truth emerged through multiple independent channels. The catalyst came from an unexpected source, Mark's colleague Jason, who had initially accepted the mutual separation before diagnosis narrative until direct exposure to contradictory evidence. His message to our mutual friend group carried the impact of neutral third-party verification. For clarity, Mark told our Singapore team he was leaving due to Claire's neediness after her diagnosis. His exact words. He claimed she was using cancer to manipulate him into staying. I can't remain silent about this level of deception. The message, forwarded to me by 3 separate friends, confirmed Mark's narrative was collapsing internally at his workplace as well. The manipulation attempt backfiring as colleagues witnessed direct contradiction between public positioning and private statements. I maintained strategic silence, allowing natural information dissemination without direct management. Truth spreading organically through authenticated channels held greater impact than orchestrated defense against his calculated misrepresentations. Sarah's position in the narrative underwent significant recalibration as additional information emerged through corporate channels. Her carefully constructed role as innocent party in relationship transition dissolved through documented timeline evidence. Particularly damaging were revealed text exchanges with Mark discussing waiting for the right moment to implement their planned future. She's been placed on administrative leave pending ethics review, Jason informed Rachel during a brief hospital visit. The company has strict policies about disclosure requirements for workplace relationships, especially involving international transfers. The professional consequences expanding independently through corporate policy application, organizational systems, responding to documented behavior without requiring my direct intervention or resource expenditure. Most revealing was the social media shift, Mark's carefully curated posts, showing supportive but separate narrative meeting increasingly public challenge. Former colleagues, mutual friends, and even distant acquaintances, posting direct questions about abandonment circumstances and timeline accuracy. His attempted damage control through selective comment deletion and access restriction only accelerated information spread, the visible management attempts confirming rather than mitigating narrative manipulation suspicions. Meanwhile, my own recovery journey garnered unexpected support network expansion. What began as practical assistance from close friends evolved into community resilience demonstration. Meal coordination schedules, treatment transportation volunteers, professional colleagues implementing workload coverage systems. The contrast between authentic support network activation and Mark's collapsing social positioning created narrative clarity that no strategic messaging could have achieved more effectively. By the 3rd week post-surgery, the social ecosystem had reorganized completely around verified reality rather than managed narrative. Mark's carefully constructed explanation, mutual separation with unfortunate timing, thoroughly displaced by documented abandonment during medical crisis. The division between loyalty and truth resolved predominantly toward truth, mutual friends choosing authentic support over diplomatic neutrality, professional contacts prioritizing ethical clarity over political calculation, community members demonstrating value alignment through practical action. Mark's communication strategy shifted accordingly. The calculated reasonableness replaced by increasingly desperate narrative reassertion attempts as social consequences expanded beyond control parameters. People are spreading damaging mischaracterizations about our situation. Claire's health challenges are difficult enough without adding relationship distortions. I've maintained privacy out of respect. but the timeline being presented is simply untrue. His message to mutual friends, forwarded to me immediately by multiple recipients, revealed growing recognition of untenable position. The vague timeline reference without specific correction, the strategic privacy claim without factual clarification, the implied victim positioning without accountability acknowledgement. I maintained strategic documentation without direct engagement, each communication attempt strengthening evidence compilation without requiring energy expenditure during critical healing and treatment preparation phases. The professional consequences continued expanding independently. Mark's Singapore position officially reassigned according to company announcement. His partnership track status internally redesignated, according to Jason's discreet update. His industry reputation undergoing significant recalibration through natural information dissemination. Most surprisingly, Sarah's strategic extraction emerged through mutual connection channels. Her return to previous position in domestic office, conspicuous social media absence, and apparent apartment rental termination suggesting relationship dissolution, following opportunity benefit elimination. She's telling colleagues it was a professional misunderstanding, Jason reported during a brief visit, claiming Mark misrepresented both his marital situation and her position opportunities. The predictable alliance dissolution under consequence pressure, convenient betrayal narrative replacing partnership commitment, once advantage calculation shifted unfavorably. By the chemotherapy preparation appointment, the social infrastructure supporting my treatment journey had solidified beyond original support network parameters. Dr. Rivera noted the extensive coordination system with professional approval. Your support structure is exceptional, she observed, while reviewing treatment protocols. The comprehensive coverage across all practical dimensions substantially improves outcome optimization capabilities. The contrast between abandoned spouse narrative and demonstrated community activation created reality documentation no strategic positioning could effectively counter. Mark's anticipated advantage, my isolation during vulnerability, transformed instead into unprecedented support network demonstration. Most significant was the unexpected professional development emerging during recovery, my company implementing comprehensive remote work accommodation with expanded team support structure, colleagues reorganizing project timelines around treatment schedule, leadership adjusting advancement criteria to incorporate medical circumstance navigation capabilities. The board specifically mentioned your strategic crisis management as demonstrating exceptional leadership capacity, my director explained during a brief home visit. They've authorized additional support resources while maintaining your project authority and advancement track. The professional recognition of strategic implementation skill during extreme circumstances, creating career advantage rather than limitation, directly contradicting Mark's calculated extraction timing based on anticipated professional impact during treatment. The final significant social development arrived through Eleanor's continued presence, her practical support evolving into permanent relocation to provide consistent assistance through treatment phases. I've taken early retirement, she announced simply, arranging the spare bedroom with characteristic efficiency. More valuable here than continuing unnecessary work. Her matter-of-fact presence representing the most damaging social consequence to Mark's narrative, his own mother choosing unequivocal support for abandoned spouse over diplomatic equivocation regarding son's behavior. The social fallout had crystallized decisive reality documentation across all relevant dimensions: personal relationships, professional networks, family connections, and community structures, all realigning around verified truth rather than manipulated narrative. Mark had calculated his extraction timing to maximize vulnerability through isolation during critical treatment phases. Instead, his abandonment had catalyzed unprecedented support network activation through authentic value demonstration. As chemotherapy preparation concluded, the social ecosystem had transformed completely. Organized support infrastructure replacing anticipated isolation, professional advancement continuing despite treatment demands, family realignment demonstrating value prioritization over biological obligation. The social consequences expanding independently through natural information dissemination while requiring no energy expenditure during critical treatment focus. Mark's fundamental social miscalculation becoming increasingly apparent as isolation manifested in precisely the opposite direction from his strategic calculation. The conference room at Catherine's law office provided neutral territory for the inevitable confrontation. Mediation sessions scheduled strategically between my first and second chemotherapy treatments when energy levels permitted optimal engagement, the timing deliberate, the location controlled, the circumstances engineered for maximum advantage during necessary direct interaction. Mark arrived with calculated precision, expensive suit suggesting continued prosperity despite professional setbacks, practiced concerned expression masking visible stress indicators, attorney flanking him with matching conservative presentation. Their coordinated entrance designed to project unified strength despite increasingly disadvantageous position. I maintained composed neutrality as they settled across the table. No visible reaction to first direct contact since abandonment. No emotional engagement despite chemotherapy physical effects. No acknowledgement of his attempted eye contact seeking response cues. Catherine initiated proceedings with professional detachment. This mediation was requested by Mr. Mitchell's counsel to discuss settlement parameters prior to scheduled court proceedings. We've agreed to participate while maintaining all current legal protections and temporary orders. Mark's attorney, James Patterson, attempted immediate narrative control. My client has been extremely generous in temporary support arrangements, despite contested circumstance characterization. We're seeking reasonable resolution that acknowledges the marriage dissolution was in progress prior to Mrs. Mitchell's unfortunate diagnosis. The strategic approach immediately apparent. Continued promotion of coincidental timing narrative, despite comprehensive documentation contradicting this positioning. The consistent denial strategy suggesting limited alternative options remaining available. Catherine responded with subtle power demonstration, placing 3 precisely organized folders on the conference table. Before discussing settlement parameters, we should establish factual foundation to ensure productive conversation. The first folder opened to reveal comprehensive chronological documentation, financial records, text messages, witness statements, employment documents, each element methodically establishing the abandonment timeline with irrefutable precision. Mr. Mitchell informed my client of his departure immediately following cancer diagnosis, specifically stating he didn't sign up for this, Catherine noted, indicating highlighted documentation. Prior separation discussions are entirely absent from any verifiable record. Mark shifted uncomfortably as his attorney reviewed the evidence presentation, the practiced concerned expression slipping momentarily before reinstatement. The calculated narrative confronting documented reality with predictable destabilization effect. Furthermore, Catherine continued, opening the second folder, Mr. Mitchell's relationship with Sarah Reynolds demonstrably preceded the separation by approximately 7 months, with significant financial resources diverted to support this relationship during marriage. The evidence presentation continued with relentless precision. International transfer application documentation, apartment lease signed months before diagnosis, joint travel arrangements disguised as business expenses, each element systematically dismantling the coincidental timing narrative with factual chronological evidence. Mark's attorney attempted recovery. Personal relationships are complex and overlap during transitional periods. The financial considerations should focus on equitable distribution based on contribution rather than emotional characterizations. Catherine's expression remained neutral as she opened the third folder, the comprehensive financial documentation we had prepared, showing my disproportionate contribution to marital assets despite lower nominal income. My client contributed 64% of household expenses during the past 3 years while maintaining primary residence responsibilities, she noted, spreadsheets displaying the clear differential. Additionally, the down payment for the marital home came exclusively from her inheritance, with renovation costs primarily funded through her separate resources. The factual presentation continuing with methodical precision, investment account contributions documented by source, property improvement expenditures categorized by funding origin, retirement account growth analyzed proportionally, each element establishing clear financial reality, contradicting assumed distribution expectations. Throughout the presentation, I maintained composed observation, allowing Catherine to present our position without emotional engagement despite Mark's increasingly obvious discomfort. The strategic approach implementing maximum impact through documented facts rather than personal confrontation. After nearly an hour of comprehensive evidence presentation, Catherine concluded the foundation establishment phase with the most significant documentation: medical records confirming diagnosis timing, witness statements verifying abandonment circumstances, and medical cost projections reflecting treatment requirements. Given these established facts, she summarized with quiet authority, my client's position regarding settlement parameters reflects three key elements: abandonment during medical crisis, disproportionate contribution to marital assets, and ongoing treatment requirements resulting from Mr. Mitchell's actions. The strategic foundation established, Catherine presented our settlement terms, financial divisions significantly favoring my position, continued medical coverage requirements extending beyond standard divorce parameters, penalty provisions reflecting abandonment circumstances. These terms reflect appropriate application of state laws regarding abandonment during medical crisis, she concluded. Our court filing includes these specific provisions with comprehensive evidence supporting extraordinary circumstance consideration. The undeniable strength of our position created visible impact. Mark's attorney requesting brief consultation break, their hushed conversation in the corner revealing recognition of substantial disadvantage compared to anticipated negotiation parameters. Upon resumption, the attorney attempted limited counterproposal, accepting primary financial terms while contesting abandonment characterization and extended medical coverage requirements. My client acknowledges the unfortunate timing appears problematic, he offered carefully. However, characterizing legitimate marital dissolution as abandonment creates inappropriate perception without considering ongoing voluntary support provision. Catherine's response came with precision rather than emotion. The voluntary support followed explicit legal demand with documented resistance. The characterization derives from Mr. Mitchell's own documented statement that he didn't sign up for this regarding cancer treatment, followed by immediate departure without transition provision. Throughout this exchange, Mark maintained uncharacteristic silence, his typical narrative control visibly absent as documented reality systematically dismantled carefully constructed positioning. The confidence that had characterized his departure entirely disappeared under evidence presentation impact. When he finally spoke, the calculated reasonableness had been replaced by transparent desperation. Claire, this legal approach isn't necessary. We can work through this directly, as we always have. The situation wasn't as simple as it's being presented. The first direct communication attempt, reflecting complete strategic miscalculation, assumption of continued influence despite abandoned relationship, expectation of emotional engagement despite traumatic betrayal, belief in narrative effectiveness despite comprehensive evidence contradiction. I maintained composed neutrality, redirecting attention to Catherine rather than engaging directly. The strategic approach maintaining position strength through professional representation rather than personal interaction during vulnerability period. My client has authorized maximum settlement flexibility regarding property division scheduling, Catherine responded smoothly, maintaining negotiation parameters without emotional engagement. However, abandonment documentation will remain part of formal court records regardless of settlement agreement terms. The non-negotiable element creating visible impact, Mark's primary concern revealed through reaction intensity. His reputation protection priority immediately apparent through physical response to permanent documentation certainty. There must be some accommodation possible regarding formal characterization, his attorney pressed, recognizing critical client concern. Perhaps neutral terminology reflecting mutual dissolution decision. The documentation speaks for itself, Catherine replied simply, indicating the comprehensive evidence portfolio. The formal record will reflect factual reality rather than negotiated terminology. The strategic inflexibility regarding truth documentation created settlement tipping point. Mark finally recognizing the comprehensive defeat across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Professional consequences, social repercussions, financial implications, and permanent reputation impact converging beyond narrative management capability. I'll accept the proposed terms, he stated abruptly, overriding his attorney's attempted caution, with immediate execution rather than prolonged proceedings. The capitulation reflecting recognition of continued consequence, expansion rather than genuine accountability, strategic calculation rather than character transformation, self-interest protection rather than authentic responsibility acceptance. Catherine maintained professional detachment despite victory achievement. Will prepare final documentation for review and signature. Temporary orders remain in effect until execution completion. As the meeting concluded, Mark attempted final direct communication, calculated vulnerability replacing previous authority positioning. Claire, I know this situation has been difficult. I never intended things to happen this way. The transparent insincerity, things happening, passive framing rather than action acknowledgement, never intended responsibility, deflection rather than accountability acceptance, difficult situation, minimization rather than abandonment recognition. I met his gaze directly for the first time, allowing momentary true emotion visibility before responding with composed clarity. Your intentions stopped mattering the moment you said, "I didn't sign up for this," and walked away during the most vulnerable moment of my life. The simple truth creating more impact than elaborate accusation, factual reality more damaging than emotional appeal, composed delivery more powerful than reactive expression. The strategic approach maintained through confrontation conclusion, despite treatment physical effects. As they departed, Catherine allowed rare satisfaction expression. That was remarkably effective. Your composure during evidence presentation substantially strengthened our position. Strategic necessity, I acknowledged. Fatigue becoming apparent as performance requirements diminished. Emotional engagement would have undermined documentation impact. The confrontation had proceeded precisely according to strategic design. Comprehensive evidence presentation, composed delivery maintenance, professional representation leveraging, focused objective achievement. The outcome securing maximum advantage across all critical dimensions, despite physical vulnerability during treatment phase. Mark had initiated what he believed would be advantage-maintaining separation, timed for maximum leverage during my most vulnerable period. Instead, he had experienced comprehensive defeat across every relevant dimension: professional, financial, social, and personal. The calculated extraction transformed into systematic consequence expansion beyond control capability. His fundamental miscalculation now completely apparent through total position surrender. The final chemotherapy treatment completed with clinical efficiency. Medical staff celebrating the milestone with professional enthusiasm while acknowledging the journey's difficulty. My body showed the expected physical impact: weight loss, hair absence, persistent fatigue. But scan results confirmed the more significant reality: complete response to treatment protocol. The imaging shows no detectable disease, Dr. Rivera explained, displaying comparison scans with evident satisfaction. While we'll maintain vigilant monitoring, all indicators suggest optimal treatment success. The medical victory arriving precisely as legal proceedings reached final resolution, simultaneous closure across parallel battlefronts. I'd been fighting with methodical determination since diagnosis day. Catherine's email had arrived that morning, subject line reflecting appropriate restraint despite significant content. Final settlement executed, confirmation attached. The divorce decree contained everything we'd strategically secured: financial division reflecting abandonment circumstances, extended medical coverage requirements, beyond standard parameters, comprehensive documentation of desertion during health crisis. Mark's complete capitulation preserved in formal legal record despite his desperate attempts at reputation protection. He made multiple attempts to modify abandonment language, Catherine noted during our brief phone consultation, offered additional financial concessions in exchange for terminology adjustments. We maintained factual documentation priority as instructed. The strategic victory extending beyond immediate settlement, permanent public record establishing abandonment truth regardless of Mark's ongoing narrative management attempts, future relationship inquiries, professional background investigations, and social connection developments would consistently encounter documented reality rather than constructed explanation. Financial security established beyond treatment requirements, property division, investment distribution, and penalty provisions, creating substantial foundation for recovery period and beyond. The resources Mark had attempted to protect through calculated departure timing now significantly redistributed through documented abandonment consequences. Most surprisingly, his company implemented additional professional consequences independently. Ethics Committee findings regarding non-disclosed relationship during international transfer application, resulting in formal censure and leadership eligibility restriction. Permanent record notation regarding judgment capacity concerns in his personnel file. Jason reported through Rachel's communication channel. Partnership track permanently discontinued regardless of performance metrics. The corporate governance systems applying independent consequence determination without requiring my active involvement or resource expenditure. Structural justice implementation beyond individual accountability mechanisms. Eleanor continued providing practical support with characteristic efficiency, her presence representing ongoing family realignment values, her matter-of-fact updates about Mark revealing his continued consequence expansion. He's been removed from the Anderson project, she mentioned, while organizing medication schedules. The client specifically requested different leadership after learning about his personal circumstances. The professional reputation impact, expanding through natural information dissemination rather than orchestrated communication. Organic consequence development beyond direct action requirement. Sarah's complete extraction emerged through social network channels. Relationship termination following opportunity elimination. Professional repositioning through calculated distance establishment. Narrative revision attempting responsibility deflection. She's telling colleagues she was missold about his availability, Rachel reported during treatment recovery support, claiming complete unawareness of your diagnosis when relationship developed. The predictable responsibility avoidance, creating additional credibility damage through transparent insincerity. Natural consequences expanding through authentic character demonstration, without requiring intervention facilitation. Most significant was the support network transformation. Initial emergency response evolving into sustainable community connection, professional colleagues developing ongoing accommodation systems, medical team incorporating success case documentation into institutional knowledge base. Your strategic approach during dual crisis navigation will be referenced in patient resource development, Dr. Rivera explained during final treatment consultation. The systematic methodology demonstrating exceptional outcome optimization potential during extreme circumstance management. The experience being incorporated into medical support infrastructure for future patients facing similar challenges. Personal trial, transformed into community resource through strategic implementation documentation. By recovery phase initiation, victory parameters extended beyond original objective requirements. Comprehensive success across medical, legal, financial, and social dimensions simultaneously. The strategic implementation generating optimal outcomes, despite extreme vulnerability circumstances and dual crisis management requirements. Mark's final communication attempt arrived through formal channels rather than direct contact. Carefully crafted email with calculated emotional positioning. Now that legal matters have concluded, I wanted to express sincere regret regarding timing circumstances and communication limitations during difficult period. While perspectives obviously differ regarding relationship evolution, I hope mutual healing proceeds optimally for both parties, regardless of necessary separation circumstances. The transparent insincerity evident throughout timing circumstances rather than abandonment acknowledgement. Communication limitations instead of desertion responsibility. Necessary separation, replacing abandonment accountability. The continued narrative management attempting reputation rehabilitation rather than authentic accountability demonstration. I documented the communication without response. Additional evidence compilation rather than engagement justification. Strategic documentation rather than emotional reaction. The disciplined approach maintained through conclusion phase, despite recovery period vulnerability. Most revealing was the professional community's response to treatment completion. Colleagues implementing graduated return accommodation. Leadership developing ongoing advancement modification. Organization establishing crisis navigation recognition through formal acknowledgement channels. The executive committee specifically highlighted your strategic implementation during personal crisis as demonstrating exceptional leadership capacity. My director explained during recovery consultation. position advancement remains on accelerated track with accommodated timeline parameters. The professional recognition directly contradicting Mark's anticipated outcome. Career advancement continuing despite treatment requirements. Professional reputation enhanced rather than limited through crisis navigation demonstration. Leadership capacity acknowledged rather than diminished through vulnerability management. By formal recovery phase documentation, victory extended beyond survival into transformation. Stronger positioning across multiple dimensions than pre-diagnosis parameters. Enhanced security beyond previous vulnerability limitations. Expanded opportunity through demonstrated strategic capacity. The comprehensive victory achieved through methodical implementation rather than emotional reaction. Strategic discipline maintained throughout extreme circumstance navigation. Focused objective prioritization. Despite physical limitation challenges. Systematic approach application during maximum vulnerability periods. Mark had calculated his departure timing to maximize advantage during treatment vulnerability. Instead, he had initiated the systematic dismantling of his own carefully constructed life while catalyzing my unprecedented growth across every relevant dimension. The victory extending beyond survival into transformation, beyond recovery into advancement, beyond endurance into triumph. 1 year after diagnosis day, I stood in the newly remodeled living room of my home, morning light filtering through custom window treatments, selected entirely according to personal preference, rather than compromise consideration. The space transformation reflecting deeper evolution beyond physical environment, deliberate expression of authentic self, rather than relationship accommodation. The property remained mine through settlement terms, but every aspect had been methodically reconfigured. Furniture arrangement optimized for individual comfort, rather than shared usage. Color schemes selected for personal preference rather than neutral compromise. Space allocation prioritizing my specific needs, rather than relationship balance requirements. Not erasing history, but consciously creating environment aligned with transformed identity, rather than past accommodation patterns. My professional trajectory had accelerated beyond pre-diagnosis parameters. Promotion to senior director position representing not merely title advancement, but fundamental role reconfiguration. The strategic implementation capacity demonstrated during crisis navigation directly translating to expanded leadership recognition beyond original career trajectory. Your demonstrated strategic discipline during extreme circumstances directly translated to organizational confidence regarding complex initiative leadership, the CEO had noted during advancement confirmation. Crisis navigation capacity indicating exceptional leadership potential beyond standard evaluation metrics. The career evolution reflecting fundamental capacity recognition rather than sympathy accommodation. Strategic skills demonstrated during medical crisis, creating professional advancement opportunities rather than development limitations. Most significant was the internal transformation, priorities fundamentally recalibrated through crisis navigation, relationships evaluated through demonstrated authenticity rather than claimed commitment, personal boundaries established through actual needs rather than external expectations. Eleanor had remained beyond critical treatment phases, her practical presence evolving into mutually beneficial living arrangement through guest house renovation completion. The relationship developing organic balance between support provision and independence maintenance. Authentic connection rather than obligation fulfillment. More satisfying than empty retirement activities, she explained when declining return suggestions. Practical purpose application rather than artificial engagement creation. Her continued presence representing one of many relationship authenticity demonstrations emerging through crisis navigation. Genuine connections revealing themselves through sustained support rather than temporary sympathy expression. The support network had evolved beyond treatment necessity into ongoing community structure. Practical assistance systems becoming friendship expression channels, professional accommodations evolving into workforce innovation models, medical team connections developing into healthcare advocacy partnerships. Most unexpected was the purpose evolution emerging through recovery completion. Patient advocacy role, developing through medical system navigation experience, organizational consulting opportunity emerging through crisis management methodology documentation, community support coordination, infrastructure developing through personal experience application. the transformation extending beyond individual recovery into systemic contribution. Personal challenge navigation methodology, providing broader application framework for institutional improvement implementation. Information about Mark reached me through filtered channels rather than direct knowledge. His professional regression continuing through reputation impact extension, Singapore opportunity permanently eliminated through ethics violation documentation, leadership potential officially restricted through formal evaluation modification. Lateral transfer to regional office with senior title but limited advancement potential, Jason reported during occasional update provision. Effectively professional plateau establishment, regardless of performance metrics. The consequences continuing expansion through natural progression rather than orchestrated intervention. Systemic response to documented behavior requiring no additional activation energy expenditure. Sarah's calculated extraction had apparently completed through comprehensive separation establishment, professional repositioning through different department transfer, social media evidence suggesting relocation implementation, mutual connection reports indicating relationship termination, maintenance. The predictable alliance dissolution following advantage elimination, convenient partnership abandoned. Once benefit calculation shifted unfavorably through consequence realization. Most revealing was Mark's apparent lifestyle recalibration, downsized living arrangements according to property records, restricted professional parameters according to industry information, limited social engagement according to mutual connection reports. The comprehensive consequence implementation across all relevant dimensions, precisely opposite outcome from his anticipated advantage through calculated extraction timing. The strategic miscalculation resulting in life contraction rather than opportunity expansion through abandonment decision implementation. My home office transformation reflected the most significant evolution aspect. Conversion from shared workspace configuration to healthcare advocacy coordination center. The strategic skills developed through personal crisis navigation now applied toward systemic improvement implementation for others facing similar challenges. Your methodological approach documentation provides exceptional navigation framework for current patients, Dr. Rivera noted during my advocacy program development consultation. The systematic implementation capacity demonstration offering substantial value beyond individual application parameters. The purpose emergence representing unexpected growth beyond recovery achievement. Challenge navigation catalyzing contribution capacity development rather than merely survival requirement management. Most significantly, the relationship ecosystem had transformed completely. Evaluation parameters fundamentally recalibrated through crisis navigation, connection authenticity demonstrated through sustained support rather than claimed commitment, interaction quality prioritized over established history or convenience proximity. The dating relationship development with Michael, the medical center's legal counsel, who had provided initial healthcare directive consultation, emerging through authentic connection recognition rather than reactive replacement seeking. Gradual evolution through shared values demonstration rather than emotional gap fulfillment attempt. Different appreciation capacity following crisis navigation, he observed during conversation about relationship development timing. Authentic priority recognition rather than superficial characteristic evaluation. The profound value clarity emerging through abandonment and illness navigation, essential character demonstration becoming sole evaluation parameter following crisis-induced priority recalibration. The comprehensive transformation extended across every life dimension, professional advancement beyond original trajectory, financial security exceeding previous parameters, relationship authenticity replacing superficial connection, purpose development through challenge navigation. The final medical confirmation arrived exactly 1 year after diagnosis. Follow-up imaging and marker evaluation showing complete remission maintenance, statistical outcomes indicating exceptional recovery establishment, monitoring protocols confirming optimal health restoration. By all measurable parameters, you've achieved complete victory over both disease and prognosis limitations, Dr. Rivera confirmed during anniversary evaluation. The comprehensive approach generating exceptional outcomes across all relevant dimensions. As I stood in my transformed living room on anniversary morning, medical confirmation in hand, the profound realization crystallized with perfect clarity. Mark's abandonment had catalyzed the most significant growth experience possible, rather than creating devastating limitation. His calculated desertion during vulnerability, expressing fundamental character truth through "I didn't sign up for this" declaration, had eliminated relationship investment in someone incapable of authentic commitment, while simultaneously creating unprecedented personal strength development opportunity. The crisis navigation revealing capacity previously unrecognized through comfortable circumstances, strategic implementation ability, disciplined focus maintenance, systematic approach application during extreme challenge management. Mark had orchestrated what he believed was advantage-maximizing extraction, timed for optimal benefit through vulnerability exploitation. Instead, he had initiated the most profound transformation possible, catalyzing comprehensive rebirth across every relevant dimension while simultaneously experiencing the natural consequences of his own character limitations. The ultimate rebirth emerging through dual challenge navigation, stronger, more authentic, more purposeful life implementation beyond anything possible without critical catalyst experience activation, not merely surviving cancer and abandonment, but fundamentally transformed through navigation process, not simply recovering from dual crisis, but completely reborn through challenge management, his most damaging action becoming my most valuable gift, the ultimate transformation catalyst disguised as devastating betrayal, the rebirth complete, the victory comprehensive, the transformation extending beyond mere survival into authentic thriving across every dimension.